sign-in sheet going around, so please make sure that you sign that.
I didn't do anything wrong.
We have a special guest, Andrew has it back there. We have a special guest with us, Luke Holman, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment, but before we do that, I thought it might be helpful to go around just for Luke's education to say what your name is, and then if you have any questions about voting in relationship to participatory budgeting, it would be good to just surface those now so that Luke can cover those in his presentation. Okay, yeah.
Put them on the wall.
So we've gotten this far in the participatory budgeting process, so imagine you've concluded your research work and we have a ballot with, let's say, we magically land on 25 projects, and then we take all those ideas out to the District 3 residents. How do they vote? How do you want them to vote? How do you want to understand what the data looks like so at the end everyone's comfortable with the decision-making process? What are the different technologies that are available for voting? What's the important balance between in-person voting and having conversations with neighbors versus being able to just plug away at something on your cell phone? So things like that. There's seats up in the front too, so don't be shy if people need places to sit. So things like that. If you don't have a question or anything about it, that's fine too. But if there's anything that's been on your mind about it, feel free to ask and we'll take questions again. So we can cover that if you don't have a question right now. So, Pete, you want to just introduce yourself back there?
Pete Kolstad, Market Almaden neighborhood.
Great.
I'm Bert Weaver, Delmos Park neighborhood. I do have a lot of questions, so I don't know how this voting is going to work, so I'm interested to see how it comes out.
Kay Emerson, Hyde Park neighborhood. And my questions are on, can people vote the full 100,000, because I think that lets them have a voice. And then the second one is, I believe it's being headed towards kind of a caucus model, where the people in a room or the people online in a room have to agree on what the priorities are. And I just think that minimizes people's feelings of having their own voice heard. And so I have concerns about how that'll be accommodated. I tend to be a bull in a china shop, but lots of people aren't.
But a cute bull.
Yeah.
I'm José Posada from the Northside neighborhood, and no questions right now.
But if I don't capture these correctly, you'll help me.
Yeah.
And Patty's helping to take some notes in the back too.
Right on.
I'm Tracy from the north side. No questions, just want to hear the process.
Right on.
I'm Shirley Vargas from downtown San Jose. No questions.
Yeah. You reserve the right to ask them later.
I'm Andrew. I'm from Delmos Park with Bert. I guess I would have a question of if there'd be any cons to letting business owners or perhaps their employees vote versus not.
Darlene, Northside neighborhood, and my question would be if there's any safeguards we should be putting in place to reduce duplicate, same person voting more than once.
So kind of like a question about fairness. When, how many, we don't want someone manipulating the process.
Well, I can't imagine that we're going to have a list of all residents, so if there's a way that we could, practices we could put in place that would limit the number of duplicate votes.
Probably that run often rule, right?
Yeah, the old Italian neighborhood.
Yeah. Katie Scally here with the mayor's office.
Rita Torres from Spartan Keys neighborhood. No questions at this time.
Carol Valentine, also Spartan Keys. And my question is, in addition to the projects, I know we're all going to have, all of our committees are going to have projects that were too expensive for this process. And it'd be nice to have a list of them that people could vote on in terms of if there was ever money, what would be the first choice or your second choice, so we get a sense or send a message to the city council what people's interests really are.
That's good. That's kind of like how the city works now. They take an order and then next year they just overlap and take those and those out.
Since we're gathering ideas, it'd be nice to have a sense of the ones that for some reason don't fit into the right boxes. What might be something to look on in the future.
Yeah, I'm putting that one on that side of the wall, Gene, because that one might
Sure.
be more of a your question than my question. And then the other thing is, I forgot a flip chart at work. Do you have any handy? So if we need more writing space?
David's in the office.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, Paris, Korea. No questions right now.
All right.
Hi, I'm Antonina from Hyde Park with no questions right now. President Brady, Downtown Residents Association, and my question is, does everybody vote on, everybody gets to pick out how they would spend $100,000, and then we go with the top three, and if so, if the top three is more than $100,000, then we go with the top two, and then the next one under that equals 100. How does that dynamic of that matrix eventually work out to where you have your ultimate 100,000?
Sean, downtown, what if we broke things up into 3 categories, like the 100,000, like the 50,000, the 10,000 or less? Just to show like maybe the popularity of things in each category. Because I think there's some that are like pretty cheap that people kind of like. Just to maybe show like the popularity in each categories.
Mm-hmm.
It's your turn.
Sandy. And I live in Rincon South. And I wanted to know about advertising in our D3 for getting people information about this project and actually, to go out and vote or to go and look at the displays and everything. What's the advertising like?
It's probably a little bit of both of us, so I'll put it right in the middle.
I'm Mike, I live in the same building as Sandy, and I have no question right now.
All right.
So we've got about 30 minutes and for the presentation and 15 Q&A, whatever gets us to 7.
Okay, great. That's good for me to know my limit.
Okay.
So, first off, everyone, thank you for sharing your time tonight and allowing me to join you. I'll give you just a tiny little bit of personal background. I don't actually live in San Jose, I live in Sunnyvale. So I kind of wish Sunnyvale was as progressive in getting people involved as San Jose. And, so I keep hoping that will happen. I'll give a little bit more history about what we've been doing over the last few years as we go. I'm, in a sense, an unremarkable person, married, 4 kids, have a house, that kind of stuff. So just, hopefully just like a normal person who kind of wants to get involved and help out like you do, with the kind of skills that I might be able to provide or the things that we might be able to do.
Your name, please?
Luke Homan, Lukehohmann, Luke Homan. And Jean knows how to get me, and I'm easily accessible. And you're welcome to contact me in any way, shape, or form. You can hand out my email address and all that kind of stuff. So I thought I would go through a little bit of who is involved, a little bit about how we think about getting people working together, and then some questions from Jean, like what are the options? What are the different choices? There's small group in person, there's small group online, there's individual voting. What are the options that we can use? And of course we want a lot of them. And then how are these results aggregated and analyzed and weighted, if they're going to be weighted? What do we think is the right approach? A little bit of transparency, what information are we going to share back? And how do we share that back with you, and how do we feel comfortable about it? And then, some of the technology that might be involved. And hopefully the technology won't be a big issue at all for everyone. We want to make it as inclusive as we can. I know you know the city's involved, but I thought you should know about my company and how we organize our work. I have a for-profit company called Contenio. And Contenio is Latin for coming together as a team to solve a problem. So this is Contenio. I also co-founded a non-profit organization called Every Voice Engaged Foundation. And we have a for-profit entity so that we can go to the private sector and build techniques for collaboration and software for collaboration and have a sustainable economic model so that software is secure, it's scalable, it's reliable, it's robust, it's not open source, it's maintained in secure data centers. It's the stuff that you're using is the stuff that Cisco uses to prioritize tens of millions of dollars of product decision. It's the stuff that Mercedes-Benz uses to prioritize their global project portfolio. So these companies are using this software for some of the biggest budget items they face. The nonprofit takes that software and applies it in the private sector as broadly as we can and as at low a cost as we can. Many times free. And this process that we're building is what we call, hopefully it will be hopefully a global phenomenon. So, and the reason I started a nonprofit was I wanted to reassure people that, you know, we are nonpartisan, we want every voice engaged, we want to have a lot of techniques that have people come together. You were at the event on Saturday. We have in-person techniques, we have online techniques, we have facilitators around the world who speak 15 different languages collectively among them. We're still hoping. We were a little disappointed, for example, on Saturday that despite outreach to the Vietnamese community, we didn't have much representation. We know that these are things that we can improve. So these are the two entities that are involved, and I want to be completely transparent about their structure and about their process. And I'm able to answer any questions on them.
You were the ones we used when we did our budget games a couple years ago.
Yes, I'm the inventor of all of that. And that all started, that's how you remember me. And curiously, that all started with a plane ride in 2009 between San Jose and Dallas-Fort Worth, where I was sitting on row 14F, and Kim Walesh was sitting in row 14E. And over the course of the plane ride, what are the problems you're facing? These huge budgeting and prioritization problems. We solve that all the time. I didn't realize that our techniques could be applied in the public sector until I had that plane ride with Kim. And then we started, and this is the history, right? We've been working with the city for a long time in a variety of mechanisms. Now, just to remind, I know you know what you're involved in, which is participatory budgeting. But what you're involved in is something really exciting. It's been cited by the United Nations as one of the 40 most important policy and engagement processes around the world. It actually did not start in America. This started in Puerto Rico in Venezuela, where they were fighting corruption. So participatory budgeting, the process that you're using right now, where people are given direct allocation of a portion of the budget, started in South America, and now it's expanding around the world. It's very exciting. And San Jose has been a leader in America in this movement. Now other cities are starting to do this. Chicago, New York, we've done some work. We're doing a project now in Dayton, Ohio. We've done Missoula, Montana. But San Jose still is the leader in this. And San Jose is very inventive in this process, which is really exciting to me. A reminder, you know the process. You've shared the ideas. You're now in the process of generating the proposals, and we're now going to talk about the choosing process or the voting process. And I just wanted to use this as a way to center us and have a common approach. Now, I don't know if these match your goals, but these are some of the goals that we have when we're looking at this process. We want it to be inclusive in the sense that we want to find a way to draw as many people into the process as we can. That means, for example, Spanish-speaking people would have Spanish language facilitators, or Vietnamese people would have Vietnamese facilitators. We want it to be fair, and I think someone really talked about fairness when this notion of, one vote per person. We want to have confidence that the process that we engaged in was fair. We want it to be cost-effective, right? We have to balance the idea of how much money are we spending to get the input relative to the impact that we're trying to achieve. I'd like it to be engaging, and we have strong evidence that when people collaborate in small groups about these processes or these decisions, they come out far more satisfied than if they do it alone. Meaning, you take a survey on your own, you have a conversation with your fellow residents. We have strong evidence that people rate the process much more enjoyable, much more engaging when you can have a conversation. I wrote a blog post about this, and you can see a lot of my work in this area just by going to the website. one of the things I like to say is, budgets are not broccoli. Meaning, if I like broccoli and she doesn't, me talking to her about my love of broccoli is not likely to convince her that she's going to love broccoli. But when you're dealing with some of the issues that you guys are facing with, and you're looking at, you know, well, what about this funding and what about this funding? Someone's opinion can help you see it from a different perspective, and it can actually change your mind. And there are videos from prior sessions that we've done with San Jose where you can hear the participants say, you know, I was thinking about this issue one way, and through the conversation now I'm thinking of it a little differently. And that's the power of the conversation. That's the power of the engagement. And again, it's simple. Budgets are not broccoli, but your opinion can be swayed by what other people are saying. Now the core, and we want it to be accessible. I've talked about, we want to provide multiple mechanisms to get people engaged. I will probably never think we have enough ways for people to be engaged. We come up with 50, we'll probably want 50 more. We want as many mechanisms as possible and as cheap as possible to get people engaged. You know, if someone wants to do this at 10 o'clock at night on their own, great. If they want to come to one of the sessions in an afternoon and, you know, get a free cup of coffee and contribute to their district, great. We want to say great to every one of those. And before I go on, does this sound like a good list to you? Does this match kind of what you're hoping for or what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So far so good? Okay, we'll see how close we get to that, right? These are very aspirational. What I'm now going to describe is if I said, here's a survey, pick the items you like, that's pretty easy to understand. So I'm going to move into what we consider our flagship process, or the process that we use the most, which is what you experience, where you imagine people sitting around a table. And here's kind of what it looks like. We're going to have a number of items, usually 12 to 20. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less, but it's not like 200, right? Because if there's 200 items, people have what is called cognitive overload. They can't process that much information, and their brain effectively goes into a very bad state of not making any decisions well. So what we have found is somewhere around 20 items. You can push it a little bit. We were at about maximum density on Saturday with 30 items. So one of your jobs is preparing these proposals is think about the number of items that you want to present. If you have a large number of items, we have techniques to deal with it. But what I want you to think in your mind is 20 is a good number. 20 is a good number for people to think about. And what we do is we give 5 to 8 people. And this number 5 to 8 is very important. Humans do not collaborate in large groups. You cannot have 100 people talking to each other and 100 people collaborating. That's just not how we work. There's a lot of recent brain chemistry and brain science that talks about we just don't collaborate in large groups. So we don't fight that. What we instead do is we honor that structure by saying when we're going to have people work together, we're going to structure it so that 5 to 8 people are working together. And you guys saw that on Saturday. You've experienced that in our prior years. There's always 5 to 8 people in a group. That's the optimal group size. Now, when that group is in person, we provide 2 facilitators per group. One facilitator manages the interactions among the participants. The other facilitator takes notes on what's being said. And that helps us feed back to the city and to you what the conversations were. When we do this online, we have one facilitator because the system creates a record of everything that was done, and so the system is the observer. So we have 2 observers in person, 1 observer, 2 facilitators in person, 1 facilitator, 1 observer, and when it's online, we have 1 facilitator. So far, so good? Okay.
I can't read the font.
Yeah, I apologize.
So what does that say?
So what it says, and what it should say is, the results that we get out of this is 3 results. You will get a list of ranking. items. You will get at the end of the session, you will see what the rankings are. But more importantly, you'll get the reasons behind the rankings as captured in the conversation. And the last thing is you get feedback. A lot of times people will say, you know, I will fund this item if it also includes this or if it doesn't do this. And you as proposal delegates cannot possibly imagine every way that someone's going to think about an item. So that feedback will go back into the data that you'll have available to make your final choices. So when someone said, well, how do we make our final choices? Sometimes the final choices are slightly adjusted, by that feedback that shapes the projects. It's relatively rare, but it's a valuable piece of the data that you get. So 3 things: priorities, the reasons behind those priorities, feedback that can help you finalize and shape that project. Now, the trick is, how much money do you give the participants? So imagine that there's a list of items, and just for round numbers, the list of items costs $1 million in total. 20 items, total is $1 million. How much money you give to the participants determines how they interact and the structure of the forum. And it ranges usually from 0, 40 to 60%, or 100%. And I'll go through each one of them, starting at the top and working down. If you have $1 million of budget against $1 million of spend, you're doing what's called zero-based budgeting, and you're determining which of the programs should be allocated more or less than projected. That's what we did on Saturday. We took $63.6 million that was being spent on beautification in neighborhoods, and we said, here are the 30 programs that the city spends that money on now. Do you want to fund it exactly the same, or would you like to fund one program less to fund one program more? And we were giving feedback to the city on adjustments of the pie, if you will. The pie is the same. At the other end of the spectrum is 0%. Now that's what we did when you were talking about the budget games, where you had a red sheet and a green sheet. And in that process, the only way to get money was to cut a program or raise a tax. We're not doing that. You guys have the simple model that's in the middle. You know you have $100,000, you're going to have a list of items that are going to be almost certainly more than $100,000, and you're going to see which of those items are chosen that meet the budget. And I'm guessing that's going to be about 40 to 60%. And so that's what we've been doing. And if you look at our history with San Jose, in 2011, 2012, and 2013, we did that process. In 2014, we were testing a sales tax increase of a ½ cent or a ¼ cent. And this year, we didn't do anything in 2015. In 2016, we did the zero-based budgeting allocation process. The arrow is in there because that's the process that you're using. You're going to have some list of items that is certainly more than $100,000. You're going to ask someone or a group of people, here's $100,000, which of these do you want to fund? Now, I strongly, strongly recommend that you view this as it's completely funded or not funded at all. So if a given item costs, I think you said once that a rule of thumb is a new streetlight is $10,000. Was it you?
A stop sign.
Stop sign. A new stop sign is $10,000. And one of the proposals is put a new stop sign here. We're not going to have someone say, I'm going to put $500 for it and I want it. They're going to have to fund it to the amount that is specified according to your research.
Can we actually pause there?
Yes.
Can we do just an informal vote that everyone agrees that that's how we want to move forward in terms of everything is funded, not something is partially funded? Can we get a show of hands if people support that? Okay,
Nothing will
great.
get funded.
Yeah.
Well, it's really what we recommend,
Yeah.
right? It's really what we recommend for this process. Partly because you've done the homework to know what it costs, right? That you're coming in not with how do you want to invest money, but you've said, look, we've done the homework. We know it. Now the stop sign could actually cost $9,200. I don't really care, but whatever that number is, you will have done the homework necessary to get a pretty good price for it, and that's the price you should use. And as I said, participants will use this option, and at this point, I don't think you know what the total cost of the items are, but I think you're probably intuitive about it's going to be more than 100K. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Some projects we can't even do because they're over 100, yeah, so.
That's right. And those might not even make the list, but they could go to a subsequent research item. Now let's talk about the modality. There's two ways that groups can engage. One is, that's a photo of one of the sessions we've done in person, where people are seated at small tables. They come in, they're seated, they're given their materials. I should have brought some play money, but we actually have play money that is printed like San Jose with the San Jose logo. Psychologically, this is very important to have play money because people need to know that they have the feeling of spending money. They have to know that they're contributing to something that's tangible. We've also tested as a company things like poker chips and things like that. Not a good idea because it makes people think that it doesn't matter because they're gambling. Paper money has a strong psychological component to the process, and you probably felt that on Saturday.
However, having $1 million bill and a $100,000 bill, and I have to do that to a project, my mind, it took a while to adjust.
It does, because the numbers are really big.
Yeah.
They're not going to be so big in your world, but the numbers are really big. Hello. So, the other, go ahead.
I was going to say, when we did the budget games, we printed up our own Monopoly money, and what was neat was we had the trees all around that had the low-hanging fruit, the high-hanging fruit, and everybody taped their money onto the big posters, and it was such a great visual to see, at a glance, what was funded and what wasn't. It was a really great way to do that.
Yes, it's great, and it has a lot of engaging qualities. Now, the other option is, and this is a screenshot of the online platform, and let me pause for a sec, and maybe what I'll do is, I'll just zoom it up for a second to make it that much easier to see. Oh, not so much. Just a second.
And I have a question with the platforms.
Yeah, I'll be right there. Let me go ahead and... What you see in the online platform, and I'll knock out a few of the components. Over here is a chat facility where the participants chat with each other typing. There's two forms of chat. There is sending a chat to everyone, and there is whispering a chat to another person. And whispering is important because it helps people build coalitions about what's important. Now we call it a whisper. It's not private because that data is captured and retained for analysis. So it's technically not private data. It is part of the data that's used for analysis. What you see over here are the items that are up for proposal. Each of the participants has an equal share of the budget, and they are in control of their money. So when you're working collaboratively, if you had, just using round numbers, if you had $100,000 and 10 people, each person has $10,000. They're given an equal share. And the trick is, for the items that cost more money, you have to learn how to convince other people to join you. It's a collaborative, not a competitive situation. And then of course what we do is we look at who collaborates with whom, how do they collaborate, and what are the ending results.
So you talked about platform, will that be available on tablets or only on PCs?
It's available in the multiplayer structure, it's available in a tablet-friendly version and PCs and Macs, and we work really hard as a company to pretty much make it available to any browser that exists. So if you're using a Mac, if you're using a PC, we're going to try and make it work. We don't use any Flash. We don't use any special plugins. We try to keep it pretty low tech on the HTML.
Okay.
okay? Now, I'll field that question. I want to talk about this notion of how do we ensure fairness? The city has asked us to use the forms in the following way. When you attempt to join a forum, you are asked for your email address. The system then emails a code to that email address like a bank does. And then you either click on the link or you enter in that code. What that does is it doesn't perfectly verify that who you are is who you say you are, but it verifies that a person who has access to that email address in a reasonable time frame joined the forum. And that email is tracked, and once that email is used, it can't be used again. You get one try with that email. Now, if some person has 17 emails, then yes, they could slip in 17 times. But in practice, we don't see that in the real world. You'll see people have usually 2 to 4 emails. Usually a professional email, a personal email, maybe 2 personal emails, but not a large number. And I know you had that question. Yes, you had a question.
I was just going to ask, so in the example you gave, you said 100,000, which happens to be what our total budget is, and divided equal by 10. Do you ever have it be more than 100,000 so you get more data from people on their lower priorities when you're trying to fill in the gaps?
We don't recommend that, and the reason is because you will understand it, but the participants who are just coming in won't understand it.
Okay.
Because the communication on the website and the communication from the office and the work that you're doing is you keep saying there's 100K, there's 100K, there's 100K. They join the forum and they see more than 100K. They're really going to think that they have that bigger amount of money. What I would recommend is creating a separate forum after that forum is done to say, okay, now we want to test the bigger ticket items. If we had more money, how would we spend it? But I would go the first pass through with keeping it consistent, because the website has had a very clear message, and I'm sure all of you have been talking about it with the same number. It's 100K, it's 100K. I think it would inadvertently confuse them a little.
That makes sense.
I don't think you would be confused,
Yeah.
but I think the normal resident would be confused.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
With so many potential people in District 3 possibly wanting to get in here and be a part of this, how are you going to determine how we allocate the equal amount to each individual?
Well, the way our system works is that there is a pool of potential participants and a pool of potential facilitators. And everyone has the single URL. So when the resident clicks on that URL, the system slots them into a forum or starts a new one. But the system will always optimize for 5 to 8 people in a forum. And it will handle it automatically.
And each group, each forum gets 100,000.
Each forum gets 100. So what that means, just so everyone is comfortable on the allocation of money, if one forum has 5 people, each person is going to get $20,000. If one forum has 10 people, each person would get 10. So the total budget among the forums is the same, but the intensity, the ratio changes a little bit.
So these people in the forum are online at that time?
Yes, they're online, communicating real time.
So what happens when somebody does it at a time frame that no one else is online?
Well, that would be what would likely happen, like let's say our insomniac comes in at 2 in the morning. Right? What happens is the system, and this is getting rather sophisticated, so it's kind of fun to talk about this. What the system does is it says, okay, Joe Insomniac comes in at 2 in the morning. There's no facilitators, they're asleep. But I'm gonna start a forum. And I'm gonna put Joe in, and Joe has $10,000 because there's 9 other slots. There's 9 other seats at the table. So far so good? And what the system does is it waits a minute. And if no one else comes in, it drops a slot and the money gets reallocated. It waits another minute. If no one comes in, it drops a slot and reallocates. Presumably at 2 in the morning, no one else would come in. All of the slots drop and Joe Insomniac ends up with $100,000, which means it's equivalent to a single solo participant. So either you get someone to collaborate with, or you devolve into a single survey. So either way, if someone comes in, they can participate.
In the model that you're explaining, if I'm the insomniac or just the person at the weird time, then I potentially could be waiting 8 to 10 minutes for it to finally allocate an amount of money to me to be able to start voting.
No, you're going to be able to spend your money the moment you're in. So you start with 10,000, you can spend 10,000 right away. But what we find is that when people are reviewing that list and making their first bids, it takes at least a minute to do that, and you'll start to see the process of what we call slot dropping. So we've kind of tuned those numbers in our corporate work, and we find that 1 minute really kind of gets it through that, hey, you're going to get more money if people aren't coming in.
Okay, because rather than waiting, it would
No, you're not going to wait. Yeah, that waiting, you're right, that waiting drives people nuts. They're going to click in and click out. But the moment that you're in, you're given a starting budget, it can only increase. I think she had a question, and then you too.
Just in general, is there another model for voting besides the electronic?
There's an in-person structure here, and we're going to be, I don't know the exact dates and times of the in-person meetings, but we're definitely going to have an in-person component.
We're going to have 4 in-person voting expos. I think I emailed everyone
So the expo is a voting opportunity?
The expo is the in-person voting.
That was separate from the...
No, so
No, it's going to be the same content, it's just in person.
Yeah, but you still have to collaborate with others, right?
Well, that would be the goal.
Yes.
Because I was imagining that people would actually have a chance to just vote their own personal preference and not have to collaborate.
Let's talk about that. The other option that we're building for the city is a mobile phone friendly, iPhone, Samsung, Android, that will look like this, and all you do is you'll look at the sample proposals like illegal dumping, and the middle screen is where you'll just kind of say yes or no to the ones you want. And that's a single user survey, if you will, or a single voting process. Now the one thing we don't have, I think, as part of our plan is a paper-based single user survey. That has not been part of our plan. It's not something that we're opposed to. I find that it produces less compelling results when you're dealing with something as complex as budgets.
I think what the thought has been, because we don't want to exclude someone, right, that might traditionally vote with a paper ballot, is that we could have a couple of days where we take iPads out into the community and engage people on the online process, but like with a couple of volunteers. So you're getting out to people who might not have the technology, but we're still probably not going to put something in paper form at this point.
But they can vote that way?
Yeah, sure, right.
I'm
So
disappointed by that.
let's talk about it.
Well, I envisioned having, like a polling place, and you go to the polling booth and you're going to vote from a paper ballot.
Because I'm afraid you're going to exclude a part. I think this is overwhelming. It's complicated.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about it.
So if we wanted to support the notion of like a polling booth that's private, that would be easy to do at one of the expos, right? Print out the list, mark the items that you want, go to your, go into the booth, mark the items that you want, and come out. I don't have a problem with that. I think, and if it would increase inclusion, I think that's great. But what you miss is the opportunity for collaboration and education that occurs when people are talking about something that's important to them. And so I would say let's use it as an additive component and add that as an option. Now, what we're going to do...
I mean, can they talk and then go vote?
That's a way to do it. Sure.
Well, I just feel like people will be talking to something that they wouldn't have voted otherwise if they just had their own ballot. So
Can I throw something on that?
Yeah, sure.
What I liked about the collaboration is we had to decide at some point where, okay, this particular item wasn't fully funded. So these people said, okay, I'm willing to take my money out of this and put it towards this to fully fund this one. So there was some really kind of neat collaboration when it came to actually fully funding certain projects rather than having money spread out and having all of them not completely funded. So there's something to be said for sitting in those groups and actually negotiating.
Well, now I'm thinking I want to change my prior vote, about having to pay for the whole thing, because my imagination was that people would be able to express their interest in what they wanted, and then there'd be some way of pulling that together, looking at all the results and saying, well, you know, looking at the mass of how people voted, then this one could be funded. Whatever got the most votes, then it would be funded first, and whatever got the second round would be funded next, if there was enough money to roll on down. That's kind of the way I was envisioning this would work, not this
How
other
will you
approach.
adjust that matrix if you do have the people in the groups of 5 to 8, and then there's the top 3 here, the top 3 are different, the top 3 in this group are different. How do you compile that to get?
Well, let's talk about the results in a second. Let's see if she's got a comment on this.
Okay, I'm not sure how it gets aggregated. If you have one person ended up allocating 100,000, another group 20,000, because there's 5, and another group 12.5, because there's 8. Do you then multiply the 5? Do those count as 5 votes, and these count as 8 votes, and those count as 1 vote?
We treat the discussion in the group as a single result in the process, which is why we are trying to get a lot of groups involved. And I'll give you an example of what we did in 2014 in terms of the results in a second. Let me share this. So the results of a group are treated as a unit. And the reason why you don't go inside a group is because the composition of that group was unique at that point in time. That makes sense? Meaning if the 3 of us or the 4 of us are collaborating, we're going to collaborate in a certain way and we're going to choose a certain outcome. But if it just so happened in the luck of the draw that you were in that group as opposed to this group, the conversations there might sway you a little differently. Now those differences are usually not huge, but they are detectable. And that's because, again, the statement, budgets are not broccoli. People have generally enjoyed the opportunity to talk with fellow residents about what's important in their neighborhoods and what's important in the community. And that also does an education process. My personal favorite story of this was in the 2014 session in the Rotunda. There was a table where there were a lot of adults and one member of the youth commission. And I don't know the exact age, but I think she was about 16 or 17. And those adults, they were all over the roads, and they were all over this, and they were all over that. And the one thing that she had was she had her portion of the budget. And that empowers people, having their portion of the budget. So when all was said and done, and they said, well, what are you going to advocate for? And she said, well, you guys have been talking so much, and you know, I'm on the youth commission, but I want to fund the anti-gang efforts, because in my neighborhood, if we walk to school and we wear the wrong clothes, you can get in trouble. And then the whole table went, oh, well, what do you think we should fund? Well, I think we should fund this, and here's why. Here's my story. And they immediately pulled some money from some items they had funded and immediately reallocated it because they understood a different part of the story that they didn't understand working alone. And you're nodding because that's the humanity that we see happening time and time again when people are given the chance to collaborate. So I'm not saying no to solo, but I would hope that the group would also say yes to collaboration.
On Saturday, it was my first time doing this, and it was something totally new and different, and a different way of thinking about money and projects. And I felt, and there were a lot of projects on the list.
It was a little heavy, yes.
Yeah, so it was confusing, and we're all trying to read as fast as we can, all trying to then say something about the projects that we felt strongly about. And then we've got so much time, and we've got to put the money on this, and we've got to put the money on that, and how much. And then I'm still trying to read through, and I'm saying, the money that I just put $1 million on something, but nobody's talked about the code office. We need the code office funded to implement these, to make sure it works. And it felt so rushed, and like I needed more time.
Yeah, I think that's been a general feedback on Saturday, and I think that that's something that we'll take into the sessions that you guys are producing. We'll allocate a little bit more time. I don't disagree that a little bit more time would have been very beneficial.
But it was also, the people who were stronger in their arguments for what they wanted, I found myself being pulled into that, even though I felt strong about something else. But then I realized, but all of it's important, that's right here. It should all, it should all have its own money.
Well, and that's the challenge with any budgeting process in the civic sector, right? Everything seems important, and yet we've got to make choices. You can't, even in business, right? You have these many ideas, and it's always more than the money you have. So this notion of finding a way to that prioritization choice is really important.
So it's our priority here to chunk it down in our traffic.
Yeah, I think that you'll get better.
Right. I think somehow they need to tell them ahead of time so
Yeah,
they
vote
shop.
is not the right word.
And I think it's
Because
gonna be,
Yeah, vote may not be the right word.
yeah, and I think it's gonna be a lot clearer when we have our projects defined. It's gonna be a little bit easier to understand how that process is gonna work, once we have the projects defined and people sit down and they start talking and discussing and, I don't know how else to say it.
We need to
Well,
get the word out.
Well, I think there's two things that I would say. One is, once you develop your projects, but we're going to have what we call a test run, and I would like you to experience it. So let's experience what it's like to have this group, which would be organized, roughly this would be probably 5 or 6 groups. And I think you should try it.
Oh, no, I did it 1 year, and, I enjoyed it, but that wasn't my vision for what this was.
I see. Yeah.
I thought this was gonna be more of an outreach to people that haven't been that.
Well, that's why we want to open up as many channels as possible. I'm with you. We want to open up as many channels in as cost-effective a manner as possible. For example, you could, I'm not advocating this, since we're being taped, I want to make sure I'm not advocating that you invest the money to send a direct mailer to every home. You could, and that may or may not increase participation. But it's a balancing of how do we get people comfortable with participating. Ideally, come to the sessions, right? That's going to be, the sessions are there. What were the names of the sessions?
I think the idea in terms of how do we engage people that haven't been engaged in the voting process and just in the discussion about PB was to present 3 different ways to get involved, right? You can come to one of these expos in person and have these conversations, which I know that Raul and the mayor think are very valuable, but I also totally hear what you're saying about what does it mean for me to go and be able to just vote for something as we traditionally understand it. 2, that there are then 2 ways online that you can vote. One is the traditional, I'm just gonna go and vote online, and then one is the small group online. So I think that we actually are creating that space for people. We're just creating it in 3 different ways that aren't maybe how we usually think about what it means to go to the ballot and vote on election day. But I don't think that those 3 options preclude you, Carol, feeling really comfortable saying to your neighbors, take this and go vote online and participate and vote as an individual. I do think it might be interesting to think about what we could set up at the 4 voting expos for a voting booth, what your idea was, Rita. I mean, here's the thing, we definitely have a framework that we're gonna have to rely on because Luke is an expert, but this is also your project, and this is where the whole, we've never done this thing before comes in, where I think we should be open about how we can engage the people and in the ways that we, I think, frame this whole process around, but also utilize some of these new techniques that the city's been investing in. So what I think is that we can do both is what I'm trying to get us to.
I think the collaboration is excellent, and I think that'll be huge value. It seems as if one vote, it's not one person, one vote. It's kind of like an electoral college where Wyoming has more votes per citizen than California does, because of the way in which the groups are allocated and individual votes are aggregated. And so that's just my concern, and it would be hard to explain to somebody why that's a good thing if you know, luck of the draw, they only got 12,000, they talked to a neighbor, they got 20,000, how come they got it, how does it, you know, blah, blah.
Oh, I see, you're a valid point in the sense of, I participated in a group and I had a different amount of money than
Yes.
you. And historically, that actually is new to me, that's not ever come up.
Oh, perfect, and so this may be.
That's not ever come up. Now, I'm not, but it's a valid point.
Yeah.
It never came up in the sessions we've done in the past. And there had, like even on Saturday, there were a few different sizes, but people didn't perceive that way.
Yeah, so that may be a straw issue.
No, it's a good thing. Never had occurred to me.
Well, what was cool was each table had its own decisions. And nobody
Right.
really decided, well, what makes their table more important than ours. Everybody just knew that this was what our group came up with in the form of a consensus, and it's completely different than what this group came up with, even though they had the same amount of money to spend.
Yeah, it's just how much you got to vote, you know.
That tends to wash away through the collaboration.
Perfect.
I'm going to just show 2 more slides, and then I know it's
this
my
is important
time.
conversation.
What I want you also to know is that there's a professional organization called the QRCA, the Qualitative Research Consultants Association. My company is a member of that organization, which has a set of ethical guidelines by which we engage in these practices. If you're wondering about how the data is managed or how it's stored or about privacy of people who give us their email addresses, this organization defines a set of ethical standards. So for example, we are prohibited from doing any kind of marketing to the people who give us their email addresses. That's not allowed. So we will not do anything that would hopefully make anyone feel unsafe about this process. If you want to know more about it, you can go to the QRCA. And the data that we collect will be handed to the city. Now we also will analyze the data for the city, and the kind of report that we will create, just to give you, let's see, let me make sure I'm grabbing the right one. In 2014, we tested whether or not the city should engage a 1/4 cent or 1/2 cent sales tax, and if it did, how would it be spent? It's a very similar process. We had 13 tables in the rotunda. We did 21 online forums or 21 online games, and because we were testing 2 things, half the people that were being engaged got the 1/4 cent money, the other half got the 1/2 cent money. So that respectively was $34 or $68 million. So far so good? Now the next slide is very colorful, but let me walk you through it. And I'm only going to show this slide. The rest of this deck is actually available on the city's website. On the left-hand side, we had the 34 million. On the right-hand side, we had the 68 million. On the top part, we had the in-person forums. And on the bottom part, we had the online forums. And the items are color-coded to try and help you pick out. For example, if you look in person, the #1 item purchased was 20 police community service officers. It was the #2 item online, and if you go to in-person, the #2 item was gang prevention. Online, it was #3. So what we're starting to see is a fairly significant correlation between how people chose in-person and online. Are you with me on this? Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's kind of an eye chart. What you'll actually see, which what we found interesting, was the biggest variance was in this area right here. The biggest variance was when we went online with a lot of money. It was they struggled to reach consensus on the actual items that they wanted. And then what we'll do, and again, this is what we'll do with your data, we'll grind it up, we'll look at it in various ways. We'll give you a ranking that says, for people, if people vote through a survey, we'll tell you, here was what the ranking is if you just look at the survey. Here was what the ranking where people did the online, non-collaborative process. Here was the ranking for people who did it in person, collaboratively. And here's the ranking for people who did it online, collaboratively. Historically, we tend to see trends. And those trends are what's going to bubble up. Now the last question I'm going to answer is, someone said, well, what happens if we look at that list of items and we go down the list and by the fourth item we've exceeded 100K? And someone made the suggestion, should we skip that fourth item and go to the next item that fits? That is my formal recommendation. Whoever said that, I agree with that person. You go at the top. If the next item can fit in the budget, you take it. If the next item can't, you just keep going down the list and you preserve the priority of the residents as much as possible in the funding process. And I'm over budget on time. Do you feel that these were answered? I think the one that we didn't answer was letting business owners and employees participate.
I wrote that here, so I think that we can, for now, let's just hold the who can vote and the how are we going to outreach to people around voting, and see if there's any other questions for
Mine had the 3 categories.
Oh, can we break down into categories? The answer is, if you give me some insight into what the items are from a categorical standpoint, I'll analyze the data for you that way. I won't know a priori what the categories are, other than price, but if one category is
by price.
We give the price, but you could, for example, say these categories are more about X than Y, and if you give me that, we'll grunge it up for you that way. I think categories can be very effective for data analysis, but I don't think they're effective to tell the participants what the categories are. We can use it as a control. So for example, the categories that we had in that session were community centers, community services, gang and crime prevention, parks and neighborhood services, and you can see they were mixed up. But by using categories before we went in, we were able to determine that the gang and crime prevention was really the #1 item that year. So it would be great with me if you could create categories. But we'll also do price.
Jose?
Yeah, at the beginning you mentioned the entering your email address, you receive the code. Do you capture any other demographic information about age, sex, income? Because I could see that somebody who's very familiar with technology, loves getting on mobile devices, might end up participating more probably than somebody that's not as familiar with it. And so the example I think you gave earlier about the teenager, the youth, that kind of raised their hand and said, this is an issue that's important to me, multiply that by 500 or 1,000 and you're going to start to see some pretty big changes probably in the outcome.
I wish we did that. Unfortunately, at this time, our software doesn't collect that kind of demographic information. If you work with us, within hopefully 6 months we'll have that, but right now we don't. We don't capture anything.
Cool to know.
No, it's certainly cool to know, but we don't capture that right now. But we hope to. One of our partners is the Kettering Foundation, and they're in Ohio, and they study how democracy functions in order to make democracy work as an institution better. And we've been working with them, and they've been giving us feedback on how to make our process more effective for people like you. So we hope to do that, but the simple answer is we don't support that at this time. All right. I will write down my email address and my phone number. If you email me next week, it will be tough for me to reply because I'll be in Europe. But I'm coming back, I hope. And I'm at your service. My team is at your service. We're very honored to be working with the city. It's very exciting. You guys are doing some new things that haven't been done in participatory budgeting. So not surprising for Silicon Valley. And it's hopefully going to be really great for everyone.
So in the whole world, this is the first city to use this type of voting?
In the whole world, San Jose is the first city that has made a commitment to these many forms of engagement. Most of what you see in participatory budgeting is the people who come to the event do dot voting, and there's no engagement other than that. And so I think San Jose, at least as far as I know, San Jose is unique in the number of dimensions it's using to do outreach. That's, as near as I can tell, unique in the participatory budgeting process. It's really exciting. I mean, the name of the foundation, Every Voice Engaged. I don't know how we get there, but we want every voice engaged. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I wrote down some of the questions on this chart, and I think that for the next few meetings, we should just carve out time to continue to refine the voting process so everyone's comfortable with it. Luke's gonna put his contact information up. Before we break into committees, I want to make sure that everyone has the tools that you need to be able to start talking to people about voting. So again, part of it is just our ability to understand it and communicate it to others, and to make sure the final product meets everyone's goals and is accessible to everybody. So I'm going to bring a flyer next week, just a draft flyer, and I just want to get feedback from everybody about whether or not it's going to be a useful tool and what your feedbacks are on the edit, so we can make sure that, like from a marketing perspective, it makes sense, and that then we'll get that translated into Spanish and to Vietnamese so that we can start getting that out into the community. One thing that we've talked about is just the District 3 staff, is that this is going to be a responsibility that everyone's going to have to share in the District 3 office. We have 4 budget expos that we've set dates for, and we've set a goal in the office of having 100 people at each of those expos. So that's 400, which I know that we can do, right? I mean, that's baseline, and that doesn't even count online or any other ways that we might engage people in paper ballot or other. But we selected locations that aren't traditional spaces that we usually hold events for the exact reason that we've talked about, that we want to be deeper in some communities that have been less engaged and that feel, I think, a little bit of lack of relationship and investment in relationship building with the city. So for all those reasons, we're just gonna, I think, as a group, we should keep focusing on outreach as we start to kind of transition into the April 1st through 15, which will be the time period for voting. And then the other thing I wanted to just get your feedback on is, if we did have the capacity to get some small resources to do extra outreach, what would be like one thing that you think would be the difference? So Luke said, what if we sent a piece of mail to everybody in the District 3, community about how to get involved? Would that be a good way to do it? What if we decided that one of the expos we wanted to do for the Vietnamese community? So what we've learned, and with David Tran in our office, is that many times folks in the Vietnamese community feel more comfortable coming to an event that's for them, right? And so if that would be an obstacle that we could eliminate, is that a capacity building thing? So we can talk about it, or you can just think about it until next week, but we've been given, I think, a resource, but we have to tell them what we want it to be. Yeah. Any thoughts? Darlene?
In campaign seasons, we have the campaign art signs. Those are things that I think could be easy if it can be a concise message with a website that is very visible, whether you're talking to your neighbor 3 doors down or not, that they would see.
Okay.
And could be placed in some public spaces as well, something like that.
So kind of like visual marketing?
Yeah, I don't know how cost-wise that's.
Well, let's not worry about that yet. They'll tell us if it's too much, right?
We've had a lot of really good luck with posting public signage like that, even if it's cheaper than that, it could be, posting 11 by 17 posters on telephone poles at every corner, every intersection, or whatever. We've had good feedback with those as well. Better than email, better than, the snail mail with what we had, the resources with it to reach, but we could reach more that way.
Any other ideas?
A social campaign.
Good social campaign. So some of you, who was at the meeting when we were at MLK Library in December? We broke into 2 groups, and one talked about outreach and one talked about what does it mean to be a budget delegate. So we have an inventory of all those items. I'll find them and I'll send them out to everybody, because I think you all came up with some really strategic ways that we could use these tools to reach people that we don't primarily talk to.
How are we reaching the schools, the high schools?
So there are 2 high schools in District 3, Notre Dame, San Jose High, and actually Cristo Rey, so 3, which is over by Five Wounds. We're hosting one at Cristo Rey. So that's one way. And then the other, and you'll see Luke on March 19th, because we're engaging our city's youth advisory commission, the YAC, to come and help us on the product box day. Basically when we make all the cool science fair expo presentations for the project. So different ways. But it would be great to be able to engage them in the voting. And we have a couple of interns in our office from San Jose High. So that's one way. You gotta go. Thank you so much.
Is that okay?
Oh yeah, no, totally.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Feel free to get me.
Yeah, Luke's contact info's here.
No, what's work?
Yeah.
Thanks, though.
So high school, so students, yeah. So I'll send that list out, I'll just call it like voting outreach, maybe we'll just refer to it as that, but I think you guys have already generated some ideas that we need to revisit, and then we'll figure out what are the tools beyond a multi-trilingual flyer that we can use, and social media, like Tracy said, just making sure that we're reaching all the places we know we can. And that's where I think the mayor's office is also gonna be really helpful. Katie's able to connect us to the communications team there, so whatever we need from them, I'm sure that's something to help. Any other thoughts on this? So unless there's other outstanding questions on voting, and again, we'll just keep it on the agenda as a standing item, maybe we break into committee groups for the remainder of the time to continue researching and vetting our projects. Is that okay with folks? Any large group questions before we do that? Okay. Carol?
I fail to believe that I don't have glasses.
Yeah.
You know, I keep on doing the Macarena.
Remember to bring that.
Let's break into groups and then I can come and sit with you. Yeah, that sounds good.
Are we doing not tomorrow,
Say that one more time, Irving.